always say the difference between a programming language and databases is one's a hash table, the other one's a B tree. Uh, Obviously, the differences are bigger than that, but I'm a system person, so speeds and feeds and really thinking about how to optimize services and products. One thing that I have brought into kind of my view of databases is that developer background that I have, which is both, the number one persona using our services are developers. And so we need to make it super productive and simple and easy and fun for developers to use.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Stack Overflow podcast, a place to talk all things software and technology. We have a very exciting episode for you today, and I am joined, as I often am, by two of my wonderful co-hosts, Ryan Donovan and Cassidy Williams. Hi, y'all.
Hello.
Hey, Ben.
So it's not every day we get to talk to folks who help to create one of the programming languages that have made a big impact and used by a lot of people. Today, we're going to have a great guest, Andi Gutmans, who works at Google on the database side. He's a GM and VP in engineering over there, and also was kind of important in the creation of PHP or in its early creation. So yeah, we're excited to have him on. Ryan, I know you have strong feelings about PHP, but I'm going to ask you to just wait. Just hold on tight. Okay, it's not you, right? It's the listeners. Andi, welcome to the Stack Overflow podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Andi, the first thing we always do, just so folks can get acquainted, tell them a little about who you are, quick flyover, personal background, how you got started in programming, and yeah, what it is you do sort of day to day right now.
So I'm Andi Gutmans. Just personal life. I'm married, 3 children, and a dog. That was kind of the compromise with my wife. I wanted 4, she wanted 2, and we got 3 plus 1.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm Swiss-born, British mother. Moved to Israel when I was 10, and then moved to the US about 17 years ago. So I'm quad citizen.
Wow.
And I've always been dabbling with computers since I was a pretty young kid in Switzerland. I probably started to do a bit of programming, I would say, kind of in middle school to junior high, but really just simple stuff like BASIC and so on. But when I was a freshman in high school, that's when I took a Pascal class, and I'd say that's when I really got into programming. That was on an Apple IIc. If any of you folks remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm dating
Yep.
myself here. But Pascal was a beautiful language, and I really started getting into development there. I was also extremely curious, and curiosity is something that stayed with me ever since. And I always look to work with curious folks. So if you remember back then, you had like the Norton utilities, and they did all kinds of funky things like indexing your hard drive and defragmenting your hard drive, and they were even able to do kind of a smooth mouse cursor in the text, ASCII environment. And so that curiosity, having also learned Pascal, I just started to try and replicate, different things that I was seeing. Not very successfully. I would say I could never quite build the defragmenter or so on. But I just, a lot of my friends were playing video games at the time, and I was coding. So it's just something I really like doing.
Yeah, that's a great background. That gives us a lot of sort of history. You mentioned you sort of thought of Pascal as a beautiful language. So let me ask you a two-part question. One, what about it was beautiful? What attracted you to it? And then two, let's segue from there into your work on PHP, how you got involved in that and sort of in, creating what we know of that language today.
I think Pascal it was really well structured. It was very clear how to build things, as you kind of in your, I was early on in my developer career, had to build things like, binary trees and so on for the fun of it, kind of how pointers worked in Pascal and so on was just, very elegant. And I would say relatively, error proof, right? So it's just something I really like doing. When I went to university, um, it was kind of interesting because I suddenly discovered that most of what you actually study is math and physics and not computer programming. And so, I was a bit bummed out. I was a pretty bad student. It took me about 4.5 years to finish my 3-year degree. And I think that ended up being my excuse to actually code more. And so one of the things that me and my partner called Zev Surowski, we were trying to get extra credit projects because we didn't like the math and physics as much. So we said, why don't we get some coding projects? So one of the professors, and this was back in 1997, said like, why don't you go and build a shopping cart? And right now you've got lots of off-the-shelf software you can download, but back then that was a real like novel thing. And so we actually started to build a shopping cart, and we found this awesome language called PHP3, which actually my partner had been using when working for an ISP. And we really liked the idea of the language, but we saw the language wasn't robust. And we looked under the covers, we looked at the source code, and we saw it wasn't really built by someone who had a computer science background. And we had just finished our compiler course, so we basically felt like, hey, we could do this better. We put our shopping cart project aside, and we started to rewrite this language, and that's what ended up becoming PHP3. So we basically used our compiler course kind of knowledge, built PHP3, went back to the person who wrote PHPFI, said, why don't you move kind of that community over to us? And then PHP3 is really what made PHP take off. We went from about, I think, 30,000 users in the world to about 1.5 million within 18 months. So that was really exciting. We went back to our professor of the shopping cart and asked her, how about you also take this as a second project? And she was like, no, no, that's not interesting to me. You just go and do your shopping cart. We went to our compiler course professor, and he loved the idea. So he actually mentored us while we were working on it. We worked on it night and day. So our grades went down even more. Uh, we didn't have time to study. But that's what ended up becoming PHP3. And frankly, just before we launched PHP3, we looked at the work we had done, and we're like, we really didn't do such a good job. We could have done this way better. And then just as we announced PHP3, we actually started to work on the Zend engine. Zend stands for Zev and Andy. I'm the Andy. And that's actually the runtime for PHP4 and beyond. So that's kind of, that kind of just this kind of curiosity, continuous improvement kind of psychology just made us continue to try and make things better for our users.
Wow.
Ah, that's amazing to do that as a college student. Yeah, as an extra credit
And it's
assignment.
wild to think also, as a side note, that 1997 was 25 years ago. And that was the origin of all this.
Don't remind me.
Yeah, don't remind me how old I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when this sort of high velocity moment came, you saw it go from 30,000 users to over 1 million. Were there specific problems you think at that time in 97 or so that it was solving for people? Were there things that it could do that other languages or frameworks couldn't? What do you think drove a lot of that adoption?
So a few things drove the adoption. First of all, it was a very easy language to pick up, and that's actually one of the things that attracted us, to it in the beginning. You could come from C, you could come from Basic, you could come from Pascal, you could come from almost any background, both developer and non-developer, and it was very easy to pick up. The second thing that happened was as we built PHP3, we built this extension API and also integrated it more closely with like MySQL and some of the other databases and other technologies. And so what users really valued about PHP was that out of the box, it had like instant connectivity to MySQL, to MSQL, if you still remember that. And so that kind of instant gratification was really significant. And then we also made it, we kind of designed it for the web. So a lot of things like input and output in a web context was just incredibly easy with PHP. So it really helped both the developers and the non-developers uh, dabble in web and build web applications. And so companies like Yahoo and Facebook and kind of that whole generation of organizations actually picked up PHP and built some really cool businesses with PHP.
Something I read is that 70% of websites today are built on PHP. So it's still got a lasting effect.
It's a huge amount, and part of what's obviously driving those numbers are products like WordPress, Drupal,
Right.
Magento, right? A lot of these out of the box packaged apps. PHP, I'd say we have so many languages right now, right on the web, like PHP, Python, Node, and so on. So I'd say it's not as popular as it was back then. I mean, back then really everyone was using it, but still, it's I would say the workhorse of the web, and still driving a lot of what you're seeing today.
Are you still involved in the development?
I'm not anymore. I've become too busy. But I do look at the like internals mailing list once in a while, and I try and still I try and keep up, but I'm just not successful at it anymore.
I know it gets a fair bit of flack these days from in our developer survey, and some of my friends were like, "Oh, PHP." But I have a pet theory that it's because PHP is in a lot of kind of brownfield development, like it's in a lot of existing products, so you have to deal with other people's code, and all the languages people love are on greenfield projects.
I think that's one point. I think the other thing we realized was because PHP was so approachable, you had a lot of non-developers actually writing applications in PHP. Hence you got a lot of not great code and not secure code. It was actually it was part of this was also the kind of personas who were using PHP, which we ultimately saw as a success because we kind of democratized development, right? But on the flip side, it also led to quite a bit of not great code out there. So obviously, there's a lot of a lot of philosophy around programming languages, and you know I'm a C developer. I'm not a PHP developer myself. But I think PHP obviously made a huge impact. I think it was the first language lots of people picked up. But I think there's a lot of other great languages out there today, and if anything, if there's anything I've learned is great developers these days pick up lots of different languages and use the right tool for the job.
Yeah. A friend of mine works at Wikipedia, and she was saying that sometimes when she's hiring, people are just like, oh, PHP. And she's like, you don't get it. The bad PHP is really bad, but the good PHP is kind of nice. It's exactly what you're saying.
You can actually write beautiful PHP. Like you can write like object oriented, great frameworks, very secure. Like PHP today does enable very professional development. Also, from a performance perspective, it's probably the fastest dynamic language out there, if not one of the fastest. But I think it is a bit of that perception, like you say, which is there was a lot of bad code out there. So as a result,
It happens with
some of
age
the things
too.
could work.
Sometimes
Exactly.
good code today is going to be
Yeah.
really terrible code tomorrow. You never know.
Yeah. I don't think I want to look at the code that I wrote,
No.
back then.
So
It's
now that
funny.
you're
Yeah.
focused on databases and stuff, speaking of new languages, what's your tech stack now? Are you still very deep into C, or do you dabble with other ones?
So luckily, we have folks who write much better code than I do. So I don't really write code anymore, although I can still read code. Um, but I would say the tech stack, at Google, there's definitely a lot of C++.
Mhm.
Really, we build a lot of high performance systems. So I'd say that's probably the number one. Then you have other things like Golang and other languages. In my prior role when I was at Amazon, there was a lot more Java also, in addition to things like C++. Um, but I think in all these projects, you kind of end up using the best tool for the job, and we also give flexibility to development teams. Within reason, right? These have to be languages that have good ecosystems, are secure, have good talent pool around them. But I think teams have quite a bit of flexibility on how they want to build their services.
Let's back up for a second there. We were talking a bunch about creating PHP. Was that then a career for you, or were you working simultaneously while trying to like build and maintain this?
So I started a startup in the PHP space in parallel to working on open source called Zen Technologies. That was kind of the PHP company. And so, what kind of Red Hat is to Linux, we were to PHP, and we also built, we both built open source software. We also had some proprietary products like Zen Server, which was doing APM and CI/CD. And so we co-founded a company, and we ended up selling that company in 2015. So really, once we sold the company, um, then it was kind of time for me to do something else. And I'm very curious, as I said before, and I like getting myself out of my comfort zone. So I ended up going to databases,
Right.
and I had to learn databases from scratch, and that was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
And so you did that first. You went from selling the startup. You went to work at Amazon. When I read it, it said you were sort of interested in the cloud, but it was always databases that sort of pulled at you, and that's what you did there.
Yeah, because even in the company I ran, Zen, we were doing quite a bit of cloud already. We were supporting AWS and Azure and GCP, so we kind of did a lot of cloud. But I was always building the connectors to the databases or the APM tools that would kind of inspect the databases, never the database itself. And so there was this interesting opportunity at Amazon to go and build a new graph database, which was really exciting. And it was like 5 folks in a garage, and I had just been done with, the very difficult 10 months of trying to sell, having your company sold, and that was a difficult experience. It was a decent outcome in the end, but it wasn't an easy journey. And so going back to 5 folks in a garage was really just a great opportunity. Plus, I had to learn how to build a database really quickly. So that was a lot of fun. And then I also very quickly started to do additional things like, Redis and Memcache and Elasticsearch, and then I went into analytics. So I got a, you know, pretty good education, um, just on the various both operational databases and analytical databases, and that was a lot of fun. I always joke that I always say the difference between a programming language and databases is one's a hash table, the other one's a B tree. Uh, Obviously, the differences are bigger than that, but I'm a system person, so speeds and feeds and really thinking about how to optimize services and products so customers can get the best price performance and the best user experience, I think really matters. One thing that I have brought into kind of my view of databases is that developer background that I have, which is both, the number one persona using our services are developers. And so we need to make it super productive and simple and easy and fun for developers to use. And so that's something that's always been a guiding principle for me.
Yeah, I feel like developer experience is something that we've always cared about generally in the tech industry, but it's definitely being highlighted more as more and more dev tools are being built and optimized, and developers are your customers and they have a very specific set of needs compared to your average consumer.
So Andy, yeah, I guess I'd like to focus a little bit, on what you're doing now and what excites you. But if you feel like you can do this without offending anyone, tell us a little bit about, like having worked in a startup, having worked at Amazon, having worked at Google, how would you describe those experiences? Like from somebody who went from being a very hands-on developer and somebody who obviously loves to code, loves languages, to being somebody, as you said, now who's more in management, what would you say are the sort of differences between those different experiences in your life, and what did you take away from them?
That's a great question. Let me talk about the similarity and kind of what I look for, right? Like I always look for the startup. Like for me, it's about, being very customer centric, really figuring out how we can make the biggest impact on customers. And then how do you build an awesome team, right? That is high judgment, has great technical skills, and you're able to build something very innovative, right? That not only makes customer impact, but really makes industry impact. And I think when I look at the work, I did in my startup, the Amazon work, the work I'm doing now at Google, I think it all fits in that bucket. So I don't think about it as much as small company, big company. I really think about it as, is there real opportunity to do something exciting, work with great people, make industry impact? And, I've been very fortunate that kind of in all three places, that's been a yes. I'm super excited about what's happening at Google right now, just because of the heritage of Google in data, and a lot of the innovative ways that the systems were built here, which I think opens up real opportunity for us to create those differentiated experiences, um, and really make lasting industry impact.
Yeah. I mean, Google itself must store an enormous amount of data, right? And I assume Google has built their own databases to handle that.
Yeah, so talking a bit about my role here, so I basically run the operational databases
Mm.
for both GCP and then some of them for Google. So for Google Cloud, that includes all the managed third parties like Cloud SQL that runs MySQL, Postgres SQL Server, our Oracle offering. memory store with Redis and Memcache support, and then also the cloud native databases, which are Spanner, Bigtable, and Firestore. Now, Spanner and Bigtable were actually initially built for Google. So I also operate, those versions for Google itself. And so when you look at things like Gmail, YouTube, Ads, Search, Nest, all of those are basically running on Spanner and Bigtable. So I really have two jobs. One is the, I would say, outward facing commercial, like help enterprise customers be successful and transform their businesses. The second one is also keeping Google up. And so that's been very exciting. And I think what gives us a real competitive advantage is some of the innovation that was driven, before my time here. So I can take credit to enable Google. We are now democratizing and enabling external customers, right, to really get those benefits. Because if you take Spanner as an example, there's no other database like it. It's a relational database with global scale. It can do petabyte scale OLTP, and is strongly externally consistent. Like there is nothing like it out there. It's 5 nines available, and it truly is that available. There's no other relational database out there like that. And so we had to build that for Google because Google had very unique requirements. But now, as you're seeing every industry trying to go through digital transformation, right? They have the same problems. They're global businesses. Businesses, they have to be on 24/7. Um, they keep on scaling and they want to build for success. And so being able to take something like Spanner with a very low entry point of like $65 a month and being able to scale that to thousands of nodes, petabyte scale, like some of our customers like ShareChat and Uber are kind of running, very large scale applications.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
very
I
unique.
feel like your point about building it internally and then being able to understand the strengths and take it to the, I don't know if you've ever heard this little product called AWS, but you know, maybe if you'd stuck with that shopping cart project at the beginning, you'd be in a very different position instead of
There you go.
something completely in 1997. So yeah, we're at about the 22-minute mark, so we have another 10, 15 minutes of recording. You were just kind of focusing there on what's exciting to you internally, so maybe we can continue a little bit on that track. Ryan or Cassidy, I'll let you lead off and get out of the way, but yeah, I mean, within the database world and looking at what's happening in cloud, what would you like to hear from Andi? We spend a lot of time on this show talking about all the different sort of on ramps, especially for new developers that are coming from AWS and GCP, so maybe touching on that in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking we've talked to a lot of people who build databases and handle a lot of data, and it's what I've been realizing the last few years is that there's so many different kinds of databases. I think early when I got into it, it was just like MySQL, maybe MS SQL if you want to pay for it, and now there's so many specific purpose-built databases. Um, can you talk about why that is and what the sort of landscape looks like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, I think there's different points of view in that, right? So you can look at, a company like AWS that takes a very kind of purpose-built database approach, right? And has one of everything. You can look at Azure, who basically, tries to do multi-model, not very successfully, in my opinion, but but they kind of take a multi-model approach. I would say, at Google, we're kind of the pragmatists. Like, we don't want to confuse customers with too many options, but we also think like having too few options isn't the right answer either. And so I think kind of, it ultimately goes back to how do you make sure developers are super productive, right? Have an easy experience, but can also build for scale. And so that's where, I would say we're trying to take a pragmatic approach and really appeal to two areas. One is the lift and shift migrations. And by the way, according to Gartner, 75% of databases will be in the cloud this year, and that's 50% by revenue. So imagine 40 years of putting expensive proprietary Oracle, SQL Server, DB2 on premises. This year, basically the majority of revenue is actually in the cloud. And so there's a lot of focus on just making it super easy for developers to get their MySQLs and SQL servers and Postgres, lifted and shifted into the cloud, and just give them that right landing spot so they can actually start their innovation journey from there. So that I would say is the first piece. The second one that is kind of more directed to the question you're asking is, right now we have three offerings that are very unique. They're all 5 nines of availability, very, very scalable, right? You have Spanner, which is relational, Bigtable, which is really a wide column key value store, and then Firestore, which is a document database. So we've kind of, right now landed on three as opposed to eight, because we do want to make it relatively, a bit easier for developers to kind of figure out what to use. And we do think the majority of use cases can be addressed by the databases we offer. Plus, we have great partners like MongoDB and Neo4j that we work super closely with, to kind of optimize, their runtimes also on GCP. Never say never. I mean, we're constantly thinking about, is there anything else we need to do to enable developers? But I would say we're trying to meet this balance of not being too complex and also not too simple. And I think that's what makes GCP, pretty powerful place to go, because we have very differentiated offerings, but we also create an easy onboarding journey onto those offerings.
I feel like with a lot of things in tech, there's like a pendulum where people start going to an extreme of one way and then swing the other way and stuff. Do you see there ever being a swing back away from cloud? Is cloud just I do think it's here to stay, but do you ever see reasons for people to have more on-prem solutions?
It's a great question. I would say we're definitely, I do think, longer term, there is a bit of a disaggregation, right, happening on two dimensions. One is just over 80% of enterprise customers use more than one cloud, right? And so when you ask, hey, what's the opportunity for GCP and why am I here? It's because I think there's a huge opportunity, because pretty much every enterprise customer is going to have a second cloud, and we're extremely differentiated on data, both on databases, analytics, and AI and ML. And so I think, a lot of those workloads are ultimately going to come to GCP. So there is kind of already, it's going to be more than a single cloud game. The second thing is, as you're seeing more, just kind of more edge computing, IoT, data sovereignty, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're definitely seeing some additional disaggregation of workloads into different areas. So I do think the pendulum keeps on swinging a bit. Um, I don't think the momentum around like the big hyperscalers is gonna go down. I think there's going to be an additive piece where you're going to see additional edge compute, 5G, and so on. That's going to basically, it will need a cloud to operate, right? But you're going to see some of this being pushed to the edge.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting question, Cassidy. I mean, I think kind of as Andy was saying, there are sort of these outliers now that might themselves grow to really scale. We talked to another, I think it was an Israeli startup, and they do like smart car cameras, and they process everything first locally at the edge. They extract stuff that could be personally identifiable, PI, and then they send it up to the cloud. So they are doing a lot of work sort of on the hardware. I know Google still has tape storage for everything, and we just had a big discussion with some folks at this company, Rewind, and it's like for all the companies that are cloud native and their developers just work in some kind of Git platform, and then everything is stored everywhere. Take a close look at the terms of service. Like if you lose that stuff, it's not backed up for you anywhere. Like you have to at some point, if you're getting to scale, make that consideration of like, okay, like when say the cloud goes down or it gets corrupted in some way, what am I going to fall back on to make sure I can rebuild my business?
And by the way, just on your point, I mean, if you think about how powerful, right, just your mobile phone is,
Yeah,
right?
Mm-hmm.
So much memory and CPU there.
it's
A
ridiculous.
lot of this, like, yeah, like AI and ML, like inferencing and so on. I mean, a lot of this is going to get pushed into the cameras and into other places on the edge, and they will be cloud connected, of course. But there's just a huge amount of compute that's being built, right, at the edge. However you define the edge, right? I mean, there's a lot of subcategories of that.
All right, everybody, it is that time of the show. We are going to offer up some recommendations of things you should check out, as well as shout out the winner of a Lifeboat badge. So, a Lifeboat badge came on Stack Overflow, found a question with a score of -3 or less, got it up to a score of 3 or more, and an answer score of 20 or more. Awarded 7 hours ago to Lee J. Schmidt. How do I display the index of a list element in Python? All right. If you always wanted to know, we have the answer for you. My shout out this week will be 3D printing. I used to cover this all the time in like the 2010 era, and then I forgot about it. Like, I don't know if you remember MakerBot and everything like that.
Yeah, they're still
I never had
thriving.
any use. Still thriving. Well, as I found out, 3D printing is still thriving, and now I have a son who's obsessed with painting miniature models, and you can print totally cut. You can just hop on, download a file, print it, make your own in CAD, throw it on there. So I'm investing in my first 3D printer, and yeah, just it was exciting to see that that space is still alive. I kind of stopped thinking about it, but Cassidy, are you
Yeah, I
familiar
have a
with
3D
what's going on?
printer. Like, let's talk
Oh, cool. Maybe you can
afterwards.
give me some
We
rec.
can
Whoa.
Yeah,
chat.
exactly.
I will recommend something completely at the other end of the spectrum. Pearl de Sol lemon drop candies. I really like lemons and sour candies and stuff in general, and then I decided I would look up what are some good lemon candies besides like lemon heads or something, and I discovered these and they're incredible and I highly recommend them.
Yeah, and on the snack shout out, we just got a box of snacks
Oh
from
yeah,
Stack.
to
Ooh.
shout out Snack Overflow. Thank you for sending those.
Yeah, yeah. As a wonderful employer, and it was full of stuff I'd never heard of, so I got to try a whole bunch of stuff.
Great. Andy, anything you've played with recently? Any snacks you've had? Any software projects you like? Just give us any kind of recommendation. We'll take it.
I mean, I'm Swiss born, so I love my Lindt chocolate hazelnut,
Excellent
my
stuff.
milk chocolate hazelnut, and that's
Okay.
every evening I have some of that. But I think one of the things I've been really excited about is actually kind of upgrading my home to being a bit more of a smart home. And so I've been buying a lot of light switches and smart dimmers and so on and so forth. And slowly but surely, I'm replacing them in the home. And it's just awesome. Like, you can put like timers on when the lights go on and off, and
Nice.
the kids love it. And it's connected, it's connected to Alexa. Don't tell anyone.
Right. Are you using
That's
one
what
of
I'm
those
using
with
at
a
home.
central hub and everything's connected together? Or are you using
Everything's connected. We don't. Well, it actually connects to your Wi-Fi directly, so you don't need any hubs or anything. You just need Wi-Fi. And so we turn on and off our lights in our home with voice commands.
It's the
And
best.
the kids love
I
it.
love it.
Yeah.
We have ours. I'm not going to say her name because she's behind me and we'll wake up. I'll call her Donna. We'll say like Donna, good night or whatever, and then all of our first floor lights will turn off, and then our top floor lights will turn on, so we can get ready for bed and stuff. It's so nice.
So do you use like Philips Hue, or different kinds of bulbs, or what do you use?
I use the TP links. They actually have the actual light switches and light sockets. They're awesome. Not that I want to do an advertisement here, but they're really good. And they're not too expensive. And I think our kids are basically not going to know what a light switch is.
Oh my gosh, what a concept! But you're probably right.
All right, everybody. Well, we are going to say goodbye. I am Ben Popper, the director of content here at Stack Overflow. You can always find me at Ben Popper on Twitter. Email us, podcast at Stack Overflow with questions and suggestions. If you like the show, leave us a rating and a review. And if you're listening and you don't know yet, we have a whole new crew of hosts. So be sure to check out the blog, learn about that, and give us a follow.
I'm Ryan Donovan. I edit the blog here at Stack Overflow. You can find me on Twitter at rthordonovan. And if you have a great idea for a blog post, please email me at pitches@stackoverflow.com.
I'm Cassidy Williams. I'm head of developer experience and education at Remote. You can find me at Cassidoo, CASSIDOO, on most things.
I'm Andi Gutmans. I'm the general manager and VP engineering at Google for databases. And you can find me at gutmans.com.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.